Welcome, my name is Alden Reed and you're watching Arcane Tablets. So today we're going to be talking more about color tribes, but we're also going to be talking about metaphysical progression. And mostly we're going to be talking about the evolution of color tribes. Each color tribe gradually evolved in sequence, one after the other. And that's sort of how metaphysical progression works, just in the same way that the seasons go from Aries to Pisces, or that the chakras rise from root all the way to the crown. Color tribes evolve from pink to violet. And to help us understand this, we're also going to be talking all about astrological ages. So I've got some really exciting stuff. I've been working on this video for a while. I think you guys will really enjoy it. So let's dive in. So if you're not familiar with color tribes, I have several videos up introducing color tribes, and I recommend that you go watch those videos, which is going to help bring you up to speed with what I'm talking about. But here's just a quick map, which is going to give you a sense of where in the world you might find people from different color tribes. So this map shows us the core regions of all of the color tribes of the world. And this has certainly been the case for about the past 2,000 to 3,000 years. Certainly by the age of Pisces, this was really the distribution of color tribes around the world. Although obviously it has changed greatly, especially in the past 500 years. So before we continue, we do need to talk about universal energy signatures and metaphysical correspondences. In basic terms, UES are raw, primal energetic forces that imbue many different things and categories within reality, especially key metaphysical systems like astrology, archetypes, chakras, and color tribes. As a result, specific units or attributes from each of these systems, like Pisces, the Dreamer, the Third Eye Chakra, and Violet, share natural corresponding relationships with the other attributes imbued by the same UES. Energy signatures also imbue each color tribe with gender, quality, and elemental energies. By studying each color tribe's aspects and corresponding attributes, we can learn about their unique metaphysical color energy. In truth, all human beings are meant to represent a color from the visible light spectrum. Using these color terms helps us more accurately describe human appearances, but they also help us understand each tribe's metaphysical color energy as well. Color energy strongly influences human attitudes, perspectives, and values regarding social systems, and as a result, people from different color tribes end up creating different cultures, ethnic groups, and nationalities. It is important to understand that unlike traditional physical classification ideas, color energy is a purely metaphysical phenomenon, and this has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence, moral character, or mental capabilities. It is also important to note here that violet corresponds with the third eye chakra, whereas the crown chakra is actually represented by silver and white. This is because the crown chakra belongs to all of humanity. Indeed, the metaphysical symbolism of growing silver and white hair as we age is that we are being crowned by divine masculine and divine feminine energy. Okay, so now we're ready to talk about metaphysical progression. And there's two things we're tracking here: astrological progression and color progression. So for every 2,160 years, the sun rises during the spring equinox in front of one specific sign. And this is what determines an astrological age. Now, every 25,920 years, the sun's rising cycles through all 12 signs. And this is considered an astrological aeon. Sometimes you might hear this described as the Great Year, but I think aeon is a better term. During each astrological age, humanity is imbued with another powerful layer of UES-imbued metaphysical astrological energy. As we descend through each age, we're also descending through the Yugas, right? So, of course, the astrological ages actually turn backwards, right? We start in Pisces and go all the way down to Aries and then back up to Pisces. And what you have to understand, of course, is that Pisces is representing the higher chakras and Aries is the lower chakras. So it really is about us sort of descending in spiritual awareness. And that's why you can track the Yugas by understanding astrological progression. Now, at the same time, we're also interested in color progression, which is really tracking the evolution of color tribes. So just as the seasons progress from Aries to Pisces, each tribe evolved sequentially in order from pink to violet. The pink tribe formed first during the age of Virgo, and the violet tribe formed last during the age of Aries. Leadership of civilization also passes sequentially, starting with the pink and red root chakra tribes, and rising all the way up to the violet and indigo third eye chakra tribes. As each set of color tribes ascended to leadership, human civilization passes through each chakra. So when the pink and red root tribes are rising, that means we are really in the root chakra phase. And now, of course, the indigo and violet tribes are rising, which means that just recently, as we have entered the age of Aquarius, we are now in the third eye chakra phase of our development. So one thing that's very important to understand about when we're talking about astrology, and really any system that is imbued by universal energy signatures, is the concept of polarity. Because there's really always sort of two things happening at once. So when it comes to astrological ages, right, the sun rises at the equinox in front of one specific sign, and we're going to call that the solar sign. So this solar sign broadcasts the strong type of primary astrological energy for each age. And the solar sign primarily influences what we are creating an open, public, exterior physical reality. At the same time, the polarity energy of that solar sign is also operating, and we're going to call that the lunar sign. Makes sense, right? Sun and moon. So while the sun rises in front of one specific sign, it also reflects its energy in terms of polarity. The lunar sign broadcasts a weak type of secondary astrological energy for each age as well. And the lunar sign primarily influences what we are desiring in hidden, private, interior, emotional reality. Okay, so here's my master chart showing the age time spans going all the way back to the previous aeon, right? So the previous aeon started in 26,068 BC and went all the way to 148 BC. So the most recent age of Pisces was not only the transition from one age to the other, but a transition from one aeon to an entirely new aeon, right? And so we'll be building into this new aeon even more in the age of Aquarius, which we have entered in 2012, of course. And obviously, yes, as you might imagine, the famous or infamous date from the Maya calendar of December 21st, 2012 is indeed when we entered the age of Aquarius. And if you're perceptive, you might be wondering, why doesn't the age actually begin in 2013, right? Why not in the odd numbered years? Because actually, December 21st, 2012 is just when we're transitioning in terms of the yearly calendar from Sagittarius to Capricorn. And the reason is that these energies here, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, these winter energies are really the incubation phase for the next phase of the season, but also the next phase of reality. So once we pass from Sagittarius to Capricorn on December 21st of each year, that means we're basically getting ready for the next year. So the next year and the next age is actually being incubated starting on December 21st, even though it doesn't officially fully commence until March 21st of the next year. But I'm just going to trust the Maya on this. I think they knew what they were talking about when they set it up to end their calendar on December 21st, right, 2012, which was not at all the end of the world, but simply meant to capture the passing of the ages from Pisces to Aquarius. Now also, as far as what I was talking about earlier, we can see in these most recent ages, and even in the age that we're in right now in Aquarius, what I was saying about how these polarity energies work, right? So we have the solar age, which is how we define the ages, and then we've got the lunar age representing that polarity energy. So certainly, yes, the age of Aries from 2308 to 148 BC was very much a time of warfare and adventure. The Bronze Age heading into the Iron Age, right? The Trojan War, all of that stuff, right? Very classic Aries energy. At the same time, there was a deep current of Libra energy, right? The lunar sign under all of that, to do with the ideas of guest friendship, sort of the balance of powers that existed between kings. And really, it's that people were emotionally searching for balance, even though outwardly they were expressing this more aggressive, sort of adventurous Aries warrior energy, right? Libra is the evaluator or the balancer, right? Balancing out the warrior here. And then when we get to Pisces, it's kind of the same thing. So outwardly, yes, it's all about spiritual ideology, right? The great systems of Buddhism and Islam and Christianity, and people really seeking deeper answers, not being so fixated on these more basic Aries root chakra material things, but really rising to consider all these ideological, spiritual concepts, all these philosophical ideas. At the same time, people were being motivated by a desire to sort of channel this Virgo energy, which is associated with the organizer or the engineer, kind of trying to bring order to reality. So they were trying to bring order to reality by understanding things more in terms of these spiritual and ideological systems. And even in the late 20th century, right, we can see that although people were becoming less religious, they were still very obsessed with the concept of ideology, right? The conflict between sort of communism and fascism and capitalism, these great ideological systems that rose to take the place of the more traditional, purely spiritual ideas, but all very much within the confines of Pisces energy, and all very much about the rise of this organizing Virgo energy, states becoming more interested in managing and controlling resources, right? And then at the same time, of course, we can see that since 2012, since December 21st, 2012, how this Aquarius humanitarian, technological, transformative energy is absolutely flooded in, right? However, under the surface of that is this Leo, prideful sort of leadership energy. Really, people more and more just want to be liked. Everybody is sort of their own creator, trying to get their ideas out there, trying to basically be self-sustaining, channeling this kind of solar, Leo, kingly energy within, of course, the larger confines of this transformative Aquarius technological energy, which is very much what I am literally doing right now. Okay, so at the same time, while we are descending through the astrological ages, which kind of operates as a very random kind of influence on what's going on in reality, you can think about it very much in terms of RNG in video game terms, right? When we change from age to age, the energy is simply changing, and we are descending down through the astrological signs, down through the chakras, right? Now, simultaneously, however, there is color progression that's happening, right? And this has to do with the evolution of color tribes, very much from a very literal sense, a genetic sense as well, but also in terms of chakra progression, because as color tribes evolve and come onto the scene, then we are rising through chakras at the same time. And I know that's a lot. I know it can be a little bit confusing. There's many different layers of things going on, different layers of metaphysical energies influencing us. We have the descending energy of the ages, while at the same time we are all collectively as one human civilization ascending through these chakras. And it is due to the evolution of color tribes that we specifically ascend through these chakras, right? So again, just as the seasons progress from Aries to Pisces, each tribe evolved sequentially from pink to violet. All color tribes evolved from the primordial brown tribe, which congealed during the prior age of Pisces around 26,000 BC in the Persian Gulf oasis, which is the historical Eden. Some color tribes congealed at first in larger multicolored blocks that broke apart and separated only gradually. Leadership of civilization also passes sequentially, starting with the pink and red root tribes. The root tribes created the ancient megalithic civilization, also known as Lemuria and Atlantis. As time passes, this process speeds up, and we move through each chakra at a faster rate. Currently, we are leaving the throat chakra and rising into the third eye chakra. And I've got some charts that we're going to look at in just a second, which will help you understand what I'm talking about. Again, there are two things going on. On the one hand, we are descending down through the ages, and that does influence us. On the other hand, color tribes are evolving, and as they evolve and rise to leadership, we are rising up through these chakras. Humanity is collectively rising through all of the chakras. And so these energies are kind of dueling with each other, but when you put it all together, you get a clear picture of what is really happening in reality. So now we're looking at a chart which is showing us the color tribe evolution and progression relative to the ages, okay? So as we can see here, the primordial brown tribe really congeals around 26,000 BC at the beginning of the previous aeon and the prior age of Pisces in the Persian Gulf oasis, which I like to call Edentia, just to separate a little bit from the purely literal biblical sense of Eden. But at the same time, this area was basically a little bit to the south and east of modern Mesopotamia, right? Again, in the Persian Gulf. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. And of course, this is really the beginning of the Satya Yuga, right? The age of pure golden truth, known as the Golden Age in Hesiod's system. And by the age of Aquarius, humanity had really transformed, okay? So right around the beginning of the age of Aquarius is when the most recent ice age was really accelerating. It's really Aquarius and Capricorn and Sagittarius when the ice age was kind of at its strongest, reaching the glacial maximum around 19,000 BC. But as a result of this Persian Gulf oasis, or Edentia, was actually a very lovely place, a very paradisical place, essentially. And this is where human beings really embraced a fully frugivore lifestyle. So they stopped even hunting and fishing and were eating mostly just fruits, maybe a little bit of vegetables as well. And absolutely, if you're wondering, what you eat does have a great deal to do with how you behave. So, as we all know, and as is correctly transmitted in the Bible, the Garden of Eden was a place where people mostly just ate fruit, okay? And I know it's kind of hilariously simplistic, but honestly, really, this is the key to that pure Edenic lifestyle, right? And during the previous ice age, there were certain areas, especially this Persian Gulf oasis, where that frugivore lifestyle was easy for human beings to adopt, right? And so this continued for a long time, right? All the way, really, until about the age of Scorpio here, when some people from the primordial brown tribe started to migrate into other areas of the Middle East, and even north into Eurasia, and east towards Southeast Asia. And if you're wondering and you know a little bit about conventional ancient DNA, the brown tribe here is very much associated with the basal Eurasian population, right? And by the time of the age of Libra, the basal Eurasian population had even migrated into Southeast Asia, right? Now, to a certain extent, most human beings before the development of color tribes, which really started in the age of Virgo, can be considered as part of the brown tribe. To a certain extent, for example, the San people of Africa are also part of the brown tribe. However, there are some older human genetic lineages in other places, and I like to call them ancient ones sometimes. And really, when we're talking about the brown tribe, we're really talking about the basal Eurasian people, who really were the primordial mother tribe from which all of the other colors, which we're about to talk about, evolved from. So by the time of Libra, sort of this pink-red block had broken off and become the East Basal Eurasians, and the Proto-Pink tribes settled into Sundaland, which was a unified peninsula in ancient Indonesia. And we'll look at some maps in a second, I promise. At the same time, the Proto-Red tribe then broke off and continued migrating towards the Americas into Beringia over the land bridge and along the coast as well. Now, by the age of Virgo, right around 13,000 BC, things really started getting going. And this is when color tribes fully come online. And the pink genesis happened in Sundaland, which is really where ancient Lemuria was. Shortly after that, the red genesis happened in America, really in the Americas, in the Caribbean and the Amazon especially, which is where Atlantis was located, right? Alright, so we've already kind of discussed the first half of the previous aeon, from the age of Pisces around 26,000 BC, all the way up to the end of the age of Libra. And so we're going to focus more on the ages of Virgo and beyond. And this is when the ancient megalithic civilization really comes into full force. And this is still really an introductory video, so we're going to be going over this information relatively quickly. In the future, we'll make some videos where we talk about each age in a lot more detail. So as we can see, as soon as we're getting into the AMC period here, into the age of Virgo, we have dropped from Satya to Treta, right? Dropped from gold to silver, as far as Hesiod's system would say. And this is because as soon as we have civilization, we're basically no longer in that pure, truthful, golden, frugivore way of living. And the Lemurians were still mostly frugivores. Nevertheless, because they created this ancient megalithic civilization, they were moving a little bit further away from that pure Edenic state of living. And one of the things that pushed it further along was the bowling ale rod warming period, which led in 12,600 BC to meltwater pulse 1A. There were 3 large meltwater pulses, which led to some rapid deglaciation and sea level rise. And this is where the source of a lot of these ancient flood myths comes from. And so meltwater pulse 1A didn't completely destroy Lemuria, but it did flood and partially swamp Sundaland and some other areas of the Pacific, which did set their civilization on a new trajectory. And of course, they spread out all across the Pacific and helped to seed the red civilization in the Caribbean and the Amazon basin, which of course became Atlantean civilization, which happened around 12,000 BC. And the Atlanteans continued to build upon the ancient megalithic civilization, continued to build large stone monuments, which are actually organic machines, which we'll talk about in a second. But they also started to create some early metalworking, and as a result, early forms of class society started to begin. And certainly this was a lot more egalitarian than modern class society. Nevertheless, it was a little bit more stratified than Lemurian society, and certainly a lot less egalitarian than the pure Edenic frugivore way of living that existed before, really, the age of Virgo. Moving down into Leo, we have the Copper tribe genesis in North Africa and the Sahara. And right around this period is the zenith of Atlantean AMC civilization in the Caribbean and the Amazon basins, which really basically overlapped the Younger Dryas period, when the climate somewhat snapped back into more of an ice age state of living for about 1,200 years. And there are some very specific reasons for why this happened, which we will talk about again in a second. Now, after this, or towards the tail period of the Younger Dryas, the Orange Genesis happened in South Asia, right around 9,900 BC, right? Now, as the Younger Dryas ended, though, we had the next meltwater pulse 1b, right around 9,500 BC. And of course, this is the infamous Great Flood that is referred to in both the Bible, but is also transmitted or was transmitted by the ancient Egyptians to Solon and Plato, talking about when Atlantean and also Lemurian civilization really started to get damaged and more severely flooded, right? So as a result of this event, which lasted a couple hundred years really, many Pacific islands and most of the rest of Sundaland, as well as a lot of Caribbean Atlantis, were largely flooded, right? And this also partially crippled Atlantean civilization in Amazonia. Of course, this was much further inland, but these meltwater pulses were also associated with other forms of climate change. And while for a long time the Amazon was more of a savanna area that was much more conducive to this ancient AMC frugivore way of living, it started to become a wetter climate, and the jungle started to slowly creep in on all of everything that the Atlanteans had built, of course. And this is being revealed by modern LiDAR, which is showing us just how much stuff is really under this Amazon jungle, right? Now, heading into the Age of Cancer, we have the Bronze Genesis in the Middle East, right around the beginning of this period, right? And then this is the zenith point of Saharan AMC civilization in North Africa, right? So as the Lemurians and the Atlanteans were fading and their climates were being destroyed, the Saharans, during the Green Saharan period in North Africa, really maintained a lot of this AMC knowledge and wisdom. And a little bit after that, we have the Yellow Genesis around 7,700 BC, right? And more or less at the same time period, we have the zenith of Vedic AMC civilization in South Asia, where the Orange tribe also inherited a lot of this Lemurian and Atlantean knowledge, right? As this whole period is progressing, of course, we have rising sea levels, which are continuing to submerge the Persian Gulf oasis and what's left of these Pacific islands in Sundaland and Caribbean Atlantis. Now, we're also seeing the development of grain agriculture and animal pastoralism during this period, especially related to the rise of the Bronze and the Yellow tribes, right? And this very much does have to do with why we are going to be dropping from Treta, from silver down into Dvapara, right? Dropping from silver down into bronze or copper, depending upon how you view it, right? It does have a lot to do, really, with what we eat, okay? Now, simultaneously, we are, though, rising as a collective civilization into the sacral chakra, right? So our journey of civilization began with the pink and the red tribes, the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, and that initiated the root chakra phase of our civilizational development. And as the Saharan copper people and the Vedic orange South Asian people rise to prominence during the Age of Cancer especially, we are ready to collectively rise into the sacral chakra. And again, I know it's a lot. There's really two things going on, right? We're descending somewhat arbitrarily through the ages, which is absolutely having an effect on us. But we're also simultaneously ascending through the chakras as human civilization develops, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about the complexities of what's really going on with all of that in some future videos. But right now, I just want to focus on getting the basic picture out there. So now we're heading into Gemini here, okay? And then we have the Gold Genesis in the Levant, right? And then really around this period, it's when the Neolithic Revolution is exploding across Europe and other parts of the world as well. And then shortly after the beginning of the Age of Gemini, we have Meltwater Pulse 1c in 6,200 BC. And this is also associated with some other major climate events, a mega drought period. And this change in climate and this continued flooding, right, is really what finishes off the rest of the AMC. So the Persian Gulf oasis is now completely sunk, and the Pacific and the Caribbean and the Indian coastlines are now basically coming to modern levels, right? Which destroys the rest of the AMC civilizations there. And even though the Amazon and the Sahara were not flooded, they were destroyed by other means. So the Amazon was destroyed by jungle, basically. The climate became much wetter, and this caused the jungle to destroy what was left of, or most of what was left of the Amazonian frugivore civilization there. And the Sahara, on the other hand, was drying out and becoming a desert once again. And that also destroyed the very ideal pasture land and savanna area which sustained the original North African Saharan copper civilization, forcing them back into the Nile Valley, basically, while the orange people went further north into the Indus Valley and Pakistan. And then as the Neolithic Revolution continues, right, and sort of these early bronze or gold settlers are migrating into Europe, we have the green genesis in southern Europe right around 5,500 BC. And this is again when the modern climate and coastline are really being established, really around 4,500 BC, maybe a little bit closer to 4,000 BC. Obviously, the science on these things is constantly changing, but basically the transition from Gemini to Taurus, which we'll look at in a little bit, is when this modern climate and coastline was established. And all of this ancient AMC world was basically destroyed and remained only in our myths and legends, right? Alright, so now we're looking at a map of the Ice Age world. And although this map is dated to about 18,000 BC, realistically speaking, all the way up until about Meltwater Pulse around 12,600 BC, this would have been very accurate. And it's only after that period that we're going to have gradual sea level rise changing this situation. So, of course, we have down here in Sundaland, where Lemurian civilization started, we can really see that not only was there a lot of land here in Sundaland, making this a giant peninsula, really, but there was a lot of extra land here in the East China Sea, right? So Japan was actually connected north and south to Asia, and the Sea of Japan was really a lake here. And this area, the South China Sea, was almost really a lake as well, although it was open to the ocean. And then, of course, Australia and New Guinea were connected right here into the large continent of Sahul. There was a lot of extra land in various islands in the Pacific, right, especially in the Marshall Islands and in some of these areas here in Melanesia. New Zealand was one large island. Hawaii was also one large island. And the Lemurian civilization, or the Sundanese, did expand out to these other areas in the Pacific eventually, of course. And we can see eventually they expanded all the way to South America here, where they kind of seeded what would become Red Atlantean civilization. And we can see that there was a lot of extra land here in the Caribbean basin, and a little bit of extra land also off the northeastern coast of South America. Areas down here were not as hospitable to this frugivore civilization, so this did not matter as much. And it would be the same thing up here in Doggerland, right? So Britain and Ireland were connected to Europe, but these are not prime areas. These are not areas where the AMC was really very strong. It was really more between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, of course, where we would find most of that frugivore living, maybe a little bit north of the Tropic of Cancer. Now, the Straits of Gibraltar were open, but they were a little bit difficult to pass during certain periods of time. There was a little bit more land in certain regions of the Mediterranean as well, and the Black Sea was a lake closed off, which was also smaller. The Red Sea was also a lake, right? It was not separated, or I should say not connected to the Indian Ocean, of course. And then here we have our Eden, right? The Persian Gulf oasis area. The entire Persian Gulf was a very lush frugivore paradise where this Basil-Eurasian brown tribe really originated and then eventually spread out to the Middle East and Eurasia, and then all the way to Southeast Asia, where they would eventually split, one group going north, crossing the Beringian Straits here, also largely along the coast, and that became the Red Tribe, and the other group going south into Sundaland, which became the Pink Tribe, and really generated this ancient megalithic civilization. And of course, just to highlight a couple other things, the Yonaguni Monument, which was absolutely a Lemurian structure, was basically here, part of this East China Sea coastal shelf, right, that eventually became flooded. And then, of course, Gunung Padang was down here in Java, and that was one of the earliest Lemurian structures. And I should also add that there was some extra land, of course, off the western coast of India, and this is where the city of Dwarka was actually recently discovered right around 2000 by Indian archaeologists, right? Just as there was some interesting discoveries off the coast of Cuba as well by some Russian archaeologists showing some Atlantean pyramid-like structures. So now we're going to take a closer look at Sundaland, of course, the home of the Lemurian people. So as we can see, this whole area here was very well watered, right? There were 4 river systems flowing through ancient Sundaland, which is very interesting because it actually matches the number of river systems in the primordial Eden, right? There were 4 rivers flowing into the Persian Gulf oasis, and there were also 4 river systems flowing through the ancient Sundanese frugivore paradise as well. Now, as I discussed, when Meltwater Pulse 1A happened, it greatly altered the climate of some of these areas, right? So while the areas here were not entirely flooded, the land was a little bit higher, so it didn't really submerge them yet. It did sort of destroy this pristine frugivore paradise. So this was really more of a freshwater area, which was highly conducive to a lot of fruit tree production. But some of the sea kind of rushed in and turned a lot of this area into more marshy swamplands, right? So as we can see, there was this ancient paleo lake sort of nestled between Malaysia and Thailand here. And this was once a very ideal, pristine freshwater lake, right? But this was sort of turned into a little bit more of a swampy ocean morass. And a lot of this area here, these lowland areas, were also sort of altered. And that forced the Sundanese to move a little bit further into the highlands, as well as expand to other areas of the Pacific, right? And of course, again, right around down here in Java is where Gunung Padang was, which was carbon dated to about 13,000 BC, which is really, again, the beginning of this Lemurian Sundanese AMC civilization. However, if you've done some research into alternative archaeology, you're aware that all throughout this area, all throughout Indonesia, there are a lot of sites where people are basically reporting ancient megalithic structures. And some of the areas here that appear to be mountains, often very sort of pyramid-looking mountains, actually do contain ancient megalithic structures that the Sundanese built, right? Now, I've got some pictures here, and we're going to have some pictures of people from each color tribe with some of these slides when we're looking at these maps. And these, of course, are pictures of modern Polynesian people. But it's important to understand that these pink tribe Polynesian people were the ancestors of Austronesian groups who migrated out more about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago all across the Pacific, are, of course, the descendants of these ancient Sundanese or Lemurian people. So going back 15,000 years, of course, the pink tribe was absolutely the predominant tribe throughout Sundaland. And certainly these Sundanese people wouldn't have looked exactly like these modern Polynesian people, but they probably would have looked pretty close, and certainly modern pink Polynesian people are the closest analog we have to what these ancient Sundanese people would have looked like. So here we can take a closer look at the Caribbean area where there was a lot of extra land. We can see really, especially in the Gulf of Mexico here, north of the Yucatan, and then south of Texas and Mississippi and Alabama, and very much Florida. There was a lot more land, and so this was some prime Caribbean Atlantis area. And then we had the greater Bahamas here, a lot of land here, of course, the famous Bimini Road. And there was a lot of extra land, especially in Cuba. As I mentioned, there's an archaeological site off the coast of Cuba where there's clearly some ancient pyramids coming from Atlantis, and a little bit off the coast of Nicaragua here as well. Now, it's not as highlighted on this map, but again, it's important to remember that the Amazon was very different at this time. The Amazon jungle was not really there, and it was much more of a dry, lightly forested savanna zone, which was again highly conducive to this frugivore production. This was sort of the fruit basket of this Caribbean Atlantean civilization. And again, these are some pictures of some modern Native American or indigenous American people, but going back about 14,000 years or so, the people of Caribbean Atlantis and Amazonia would have looked a good deal like these people. They were from the red color tribe. The AMC Lemurians were pure frugivores who created basic stone structures without metal. All AMC stone structures are chaos breakers, which are organic stone machines designed to calm the destructive forces of nature without entirely suppressing them. Nan Model was designed to harmlessly dissipate Pacific Ocean typhoons before they could devastate Sundaland. Now, the Bowling Ale Rod warming period, which led to Meltwater Pulse 1A in 12,600 BC, damaged this frugivore paradise and gave rise to the AMC Atlantean phase, which began to combat climate change far more aggressively. So before, these stone structures were built without metal, and they were designed more to work with nature, again to harmlessly dissipate the chaotic forces of nature without entirely suppressing them or changing the climate. But the Atlanteans were very concerned about the changing climate. They were aware that there was a large deglaciation process underway, and they were aware that if sea level continued to rise, that it would cause the destruction of what was left of their frugivore paradise, especially in the Caribbean Atlantis, right? And so the Great Pyramid Complex was the crown jewel of chaos breakers. It used metal components as well as gases, and it radically altered the climate, right? So the Great Pyramid Complex is actually what created the Younger Dryas Cold Period. This was a man-made climate event which was designed to hold this glacial paradise world in stasis, and for 1,200 years it did so. And there are some reasons why this machine eventually was turned off or sabotaged or backfired, and we'll talk about that more in the future. But suffice it to say, eventually it came to an end. You can't mess with the forces of nature indefinitely. All right, there's going to be some consequences. And naturally, the major consequences of that was another substantial meltwater pulse 1b, which, of course, actually led more directly to the destruction of the Atlantean world. So after meltwater pulse 1b really destroyed what was left of Lemuria, and certainly destroyed most of Caribbean Atlantis and sent Atlantean civilization towards a downward decline, a lot of this AMC civilization and knowledge was maintained by the copper people of the Sahara, right? And these are some modern people from the Sahara and also from Eritrea or Ethiopia, and they would have looked a lot like these ancient copper people, right? So one positive effect of the Giza machine being turned off and the Younger Dryas ending is that it actually helped the entire Sahara sort of recover, and the height of the Green Saharan or African human period was really between about 9,000 and 5,000 BC. And we can see that there were all sorts of river systems and some large lakes, right? And as a result, the copper tribe really came to its zenith during this period and spread out all across this lush savanna area here. Certainly very lush by today's standards if we were to go to the Sahara Desert, one of the driest places in the world. And this allowed them to maintain some of this AMC civilization and knowledge. And of course, eventually, this came to an end as well, and they were largely forced into the Nile River Delta, where they congealed to form more classic ancient Egyptian civilization, which still did maintain a lot of this knowledge into modern times. So around the same time that the Copper tribe was spreading out across the Green Sahara, the Orange tribe was really coming to its zenith in South Asia as well. And of course, Egypt, right, as well as the Vedic civilization, these are two of our best sources for the ancient megalithic world because they were really the bridges between the Lemurian and Atlantean period and our more modern historical period. So as we can see, this is kind of a map showing us the apex of the Indus Valley civilization. But I also chose this map because we can see this whole area here in this very light blue. All of this area would have been above water until about really the age of Gemini, at least, really maybe halfway through the age of Gemini. And it was here in the Bay of Kambat, of course, where the ancient city of Dwarka was built. And as I mentioned, Indian archaeologists discovered this about 20 or 30 years ago, right? And so most of this Vedic civilization was originally located in this area. Some other parts of India as well, and down in Sri Lanka too. But unfortunately, this area was eventually flooded, especially as meltwater pulse 1c came in and accelerated the process. And as a result, these orange people, of course, migrated further north, especially further north into Pakistan and the Indus Valley. Not surprisingly, away from the rising waters, right? And of course, historians have noted that the Indus Valley civilization was seemingly remarkably egalitarian and peaceful. And this is certainly because these orange people were still carrying on a lot of these ancient frugivore traditions. And they were no longer entirely frugivore, but still there's a reason that even today you can find quite a few vegans or frugivore people following Buddhist or ancient Vedic or Jain spiritual practices, even in modern India, right? This is all going back to the ancient megalithic world. So I want to go back to our chart here, detailing the changes across the ages, right? So now the ancient megalithic world is pretty much gone, and we're in the age of Taurus here. Taurus, Scorpio, Polarity, beginning around 4500 BC, right? And it's right around this period that the Scion Genesis happens in the Pontic steppe, right? And it's also around this period that the orange bronze Sumerian culture blossoms in Mesopotamia, because Sumerian culture was actually a hybrid culture. It was partially settled by orange people coming from what was Dwarka, basically, and also by the newly minted bronze tribe in the Middle East that was coming down into the Mesopotamian alluvial plain, right? Which was also a lot wetter during this time period, during the age of Taurus, right? A lot of people look at modern southern Iraq and they wonder how such a productive civilization could have existed there, but the climate was still kind of in the process of changing, and it was very conducive to this orange-bronze Sumerian culture, even though, of course, they were relying a lot more on grain agricultural and animal pastoralism, right? Then during the middle of this period, you have the Blue Genesis in Eastern Europe, and it's right around this period, of course, that the Scion Blue tribe kind of congeals, and this is really what would become the Yamnaya culture, and they migrated it into other parts of Europe, right? Also around this time, the Copper Old Kingdom is blossoming in Egypt, maintaining some of that ancient megalithic knowledge, really starting around 3100 BC. And as a result of the rise of the Bronze tribe especially, which then would really fully come into its own with the rise of the Akkadians and Babylonians and Assyrians, humanity was now ready to rise into the solar plexus chakra, right? With the yellow Han civilization coming shortly after this, right? The bronze and the yellow, which is associated with the solar plexus chakra. Now, moving into the age of Aries, we're finally dropping from the Dvapara Yuga into the Kali Yuga, right? Or from the Bronze or Copper Ages and Hesiod system into the Iron Age. And this is really the period where the historical Bronze Age and the historical Iron Age, of course, gets going strongly in this Aries, Polarity, Libra period. And naturally, of course, we're becoming a lot more warlike. We're building more empires. There's more slavery. Class society is getting less egalitarian, right? Far more stratified. And this is all associated with this Kali Yuga period, right? Now, in West Africa, we have the Indigo Genesis, right? And then the Indigo Bantu culture really migrates throughout sub-Saharan Africa. And again, around the beginning of the age of Aries, we have the Yellow Han civilization really fully coming into their own. Then about halfway through the period, we have the Violet Genesis in Baltic Europe, around 1228 BC. It's a little bit complicated. Really, the cyan and blue and violet tribes were kind of merged as one tribe that originated in the Pontic Steppe, right, during the early parts of the Age of Taurus, that would become the Yamnaya, or the Indo-Europeans, who would migrate into Europe, and then, of course, later migrate into the Middle East and the Indus Valley. And ultimately, these migrations led to the Bronze Age collapse in the early 12th century BC, then followed up by the Iron Age. And then into the modern periods, we don't need to discuss these too much right now, but basically the point is, by the age of Pisces, all 12 color tribes were firmly established in their core regions, and modern physical color characteristics were fully congealed, right? So a lot of the pictures that I've been showing you are really demonstrating what people look like in more modern times, even though some of these metaphysical color energies are older. It took a while for people to really look a lot more like the color that they represented, right? And then we continued rising through the solar plexus chakra and the heart and the throat chakras during this period. And we don't immediately move into a new Satya Yuga, because this Pisces period is a dreaming incubation period. So it's not really until Aquarius then that we transform into a new golden age. And we can see at the beginning of the age of Aquarius, we have all 12 color tribes in the United States, right? The new Atlantis, with extensive color blending throughout the world. And now humanity is ready to rise into the third eye and eventually the crown chakras, and to transform reality into a new golden age. And I strongly suspect that part of this transformation means that a new ice age is coming, because as we've been discussing, ice ages really do create frugivore paradises. So I strongly suspect that the trajectory of the current climate change we are experiencing is going to be that we're going to experience an ice age, which will readjust things, basically, even them out. But the plus side of that is that it will help humanity rise into a new golden age. So right around the end of the age of Taurus and the beginning of age of Aries, we have the development of these classical riverine civilizations, right? So the Yellow tribe is expanding out from the Yellow River Valley into East Asia. The Orange tribe is expanding away from the sinking coastal shelf here into the Indus Valley. And also, as I mentioned, a small amount of them migrated to help found Sumerian civilization, right? Merging with the developing Bronze tribe, the Semitic peoples, right, that are developing in the Arabian and Syrian deserts. And eventually, of course, they would take over, really, and they would develop the Akkadian and the Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations. At the same time, the Copper tribe was still very active as well, and though they had been forced essentially to leave the Saharan green lands as they became desert, they congealed in the Nile Valley to form classic Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom Egyptian civilization, right? And of course, this is not a real person, but this is basically a picture of what one of the ancient pharaohs would have looked like, whereas this is a modern Ethiopian woman. And really, up until about at least 3,000 years ago, most people in this area, the Egyptian people, would still have been predominantly copper. And naturally, if you're familiar with Egyptian art, you know that the Egyptians used this copper color to depict their people. Alright, so we can't go into too much detail in this video, but again, sort of tracing the expansion of the Neolithic farmers, right? Originally, the bronze and gold and green people were kind of one large color block, but eventually the gold people broke off, really, and settled, particularly in the Levant. And then the green people, who really became these Anatolian farmers, then spread throughout Neolithic Europe. And eventually they would congeal, really, in southern Europe, although before the Yamnaya expansion, most of northern Europe even would have looked a lot more like green or gold or bronze people, right? And so really it's the cyan and blue and violet people that kind of congealed together as one large color block in the Pontic steppe. And certainly even the people back then would not have looked like these modern people, okay? They would have had some of these physical color characteristics, but it wasn't until after the Yamnaya expansion into the rest of Europe that really the modern cyan and violet and blue tribes fully congealed. And that's at the point maybe about 4,000 or really even 3,000 years ago when people would have started to look like modern human beings, right? And these particular physical color characteristics that we associate with each of these color tribes would have more or less fully congealed, even though the metaphysical color energy really started to develop oftentimes much earlier. Now, the earliest indigo people actually developed in the Sudan. That's where this very dark, eumelanin-rich skin color was developed, partly as a reaction to the drying of the Sahara Desert. And of course, the ancient Nubian people very much were indigo people, and Egyptian art very accurately characterized the skin color of these Nubian people. However, most of these people really migrated to West Africa, and here is where the Bantu homeland really originated from. And it's from this base here that they spread all throughout the rest of Africa, really kind of merging with or clearing away some of the older people. A lot of these people used to look much more like the modern San people, which are more confined to these areas of southwest Africa, and some other ancient human lineages as well. And now, if we look at this map, this linguistic map, we can see that it very closely matches these color tribes, right? So the Niger, Congo-speaking peoples really are mostly these indigo peoples, whereas these areas which speak more Afro-Asiatic or Nilo-Saharan languages, they still maintain a strong copper lineage, right? And certainly there are plenty of indigo people throughout Saharan Africa and East Africa as well. But you're going to find also a lot more copper people, some of these ancient copper people in these regions, right? Just as you will find some copper people even in other parts of Africa as well. So I just want to briefly show you this map one more time now that we've discussed color tribe evolution. To a certain extent, this map would have been most accurate around 1500 AD. Certainly, since European colonialism, there's been a lot more color migration throughout the world. Okay, thank you so much for watching this presentation. If you like this video, please like it, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We've got lots more awesome stuff to dive into. We're going to get into all of that history in a lot more detail. And we'll continue to talk about color tribes and also talk about modern nations in terms of color tribes as well. For now, I want you to know that you are wonderful, you are beautiful, and you are absolutely perfect just the way you are. I want you to know that I love you very much and that God loves you very much. Many blessings. We will see you again very soon.